Hi everyone, my name is Ben Dinnery from Premier Injuries. Thanks again for watching. Now, as a fantasy manager, and judging by my timeline, a lot of you feel the same. One of the things we don't like is uncertainty, is those little grey areas with regards to player availability. So when we hear the coaches and managers talking about late fitness tests, late decisions, those are red flags for fantasy managers, because that leaves us with big decisions to make. And I can relate that specifically maybe to going back to game week 10 with regards to Eden Hazard. He was coming off the hoping to return from a recent back problem. Now, as we are all aware, Chelsea inherently involved in Europa League action this season, which means that majority of their games are happening on a Sunday, which is past the official FPL deadline. And Maurizio Sarri come out in part of his press conference and said, Hazard will face a late fitness test, will make a late call after the last session on Saturday. Now, as a manager, the concerns for myself are, do we take a risk and include Eden Hazard in the squad in the hope that one, he not only starts, but probably, as with any starter, I'm looking for a minimum of maybe 70 plus minutes. Or, are you hoping then that, the player will miss out altogether? Because what you don't want is, as long as you've got a strong bench and you've got a good first substitute and you've made plans for that, what you don't want is a player being introduced with maybe 5 or 10 minutes to go, to get a little bit of a run out and returning, minimum returns, maybe, the 1 point. So, it's always a difficult call. So myself and Johnny have sat down and discussed about, how that decision process could go. Who are the decision makers in determining whether a player will be a part of the matchday squad. So just to tell us a little bit more about that, here's Johnny Wilson.
Afternoon guys, hope you're all well, and thanks a million for that introduction, Ben. So today's topic is on return to play decisions and late fitness tests, as was quoted in the media this week. So generally the goal of a late return to play fitness test for most injuries is to ensure that the risk of injury recurrence is minimal and the performance of the player will be optimal. And despite the fact that injuries are rife in football, there's still no consensus guidelines or agreed upon criteria for a safe return to football following injury. That completely eliminates the risk of recurrence and maximises performance. And while there are many return to play models and criteria in circulation, the majority of these are merely tick box exercises, which detail the activities the player has completed to justify their readiness to return to play. So activities such as jogging, walking, turning, changing direction, sprinting maximally, short passing, long passing. So maybe rather than employing a tick box method, a more sensible approach might be, at this point in time in particular, maybe to inform the player, the manager, football fantasy managers, stakeholders, fans, etc., that an early return to play carries an inherent injury recurrence risk, and that there's no guarantee with the model that we're doing anyway at the moment. So a late fitness test or return to play test, so what does it involve? So there's a lot of testing. Firstly, they'll look at strength and flexibility tests, so looking to ensure that those tests are comparable to measurements they would have taken before the player got injured. In the case of long and medium term injuries, they'll be looking at the fitness levels, so aerobic and anaerobic levels, to make sure that they're in line with before they were injured. They'll be looking at some functional field testings, which I mentioned above, regards to your turning, twisting, kicking, sprinting, etc. And then most importantly, they'll look at psychological markers. So is the player reporting that he is ready to return to play? Is he stressed about the prospect of returning to play so early? Does he have a fear of re-injury? And generally, if the player is okay with all of this and the testing has come back unremarkable or similar to baseline testing before they were injured, they'll make a decision on whether it's a suitable decision to return to play or not. So following this return to play late fitness test, the sports medicine team in conjunction with the manager and player might agree some risk management strategies where they look to minimise the risk rather than eliminate the risk. So this might be restricted minutes, so the players are restricted to maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes upon their return to play. Maybe if in a 3-game week, so Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday, they might miss the Tuesday game. There might be reduced training loads, so the volume of work in the training during the week might be reduced, and the player might focus more on quality work like high-speed running, or they might introduce some taping and strapping, especially for ankles and shoulders. So there's a lot of debate and controversy over these late fitness tests. So the reason why they're usually a late test on a Saturday is the football club and the sports medicine staff are trying to give the player as long as possible to help them recover from the injury. And this is usually when either it's a short-term injury and very little pathology, so any structural damage is found on imaging or on clinical assessment, or maybe when the player is complaining of symptoms such as tiredness, fatigue, illness, widespread pain which isn't very pathological, dead legs, bruising, muscle soreness, etc. So these will be some of the reasons why the fitness test is carried out so late. But in reality, these return to play fitness tests, they're and the subsequent decisions, they lack standardisation, so there's no consensus on it, so not everybody does the same test, and they cause a lot of heated debate between players, managers, stakeholders, and fantasy football managers as well, if you just even have one look on social media here. So in essence, there needs to be more transparency from those working in sport, especially sports medicine departments, to educate all the parties involved about the uncertainties of re-injury following return to play. We need to educate players, managers, stakeholders, fantasy football managers, that we generally don't understand why some injuries recur and some don't, rather than blindly making a decision on whether a player should return or not return to play following a late fitness return to play test. And I guess what's most important here is to realise that the level of risk for each return to play decision is always individualised to every single player. So it's fair to say it's a key role of the sports medicine team to minimise injury incidents and recurrence. However, in the professional football arena, it requires medical staff not to be risk adverse. So to conclude, late fitness tests on return to play, no guarantee that a player will pass it, and there's no guarantee that the injury that won't recur. And in fact, if a club is achieving a 0% recurrence rate, then you could argue that they're probably not pushing the envelope, the physiological and mental envelope enough. And a wise clinician once told me that if you're following practice guidelines religiously, then you're probably not a very good clinician. He said to me that you need to be constantly driving the profession forward, you need to be risk aware and not risk adverse, and you need to be pushing that physiological envelope as far as you possibly can. One of the ways which I try to describe that type of scenario is in professional football we take calculated risks. So for example, if you've 10 hamstring injuries in a season, which can be quite possible, and you shave 1 week off each of those injuries, well, that improves your player availability by 10 weeks or 10 matches. And if only one of those hamstring injuries recurs, then it might cost you an extra 3 weeks or 3 games. In any case, you're still 7 games better off. So that's an example of being risk aware and not risk adverse. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that little talk on return to play, decision making and late fitness tests, and I'll hand you back over to Ben now. Ben, thanks a million for the intro, and take it easy, guys.
Thanks, Johnny. Brilliant as always. So just to recap, return to play decisions can be very difficult to call. They can often vary between clubs and individuals, as there are no set criteria or regulation monitoring, what encompasses a late fitness test. These will often be left until the very last moment, particularly if you're talking about maybe bruising injuries or fatigue related problems, when a manager will give a player every opportunity to prove his fitness ahead of the game. And just because a player has been cleared to return to the matchday squad, it doesn't mean that he's 100% fit. Take, for example, Dele Alli. He returned to the matchday squad back in game week 10 when Tottenham took on Manchester City, and he had a big part role in that game. And those minutes were increased in the Carabao Cup just 2 days later. However, Mauricio Pochettino decided to rest him completely against Wolverhampton Wanderers in game week 11, and he basically said, look, the player himself just isn't ready to cope with the physical demands of having 3 games within 6 days. We can also look at somebody like Marko Arnautovic, who isn't 100%. His training loads are being managed very carefully due to an ongoing knee problem, so seldom will you see the player involved in full sessions during the early part of the week, but gradually his participation levels will increase as we approach kick-off. I think you also need to consider squad strength and depth when considering return to play decisions. We've had 2 good examples recently. Kevin De Bruyne, before his latest setback, was returning from a collateral knee ligament problem. Pep with an embarrassment of riches there at City. There was absolutely no need to throw De Bruyne in at the deep end, introduce him from the bench, gradually build his minutes, improve his fitness. At the opposite end of the scale, we have Neil Warnock down at Cardiff City, and Aron Gunnarsson. Again, he's a player who'd been struggling all season with a knee problem, and clearly wasn't 100% fit. But Warnock said, you know what it is, we're going to throw him in from the start, potentially slightly risky in terms of maybe setbacks and fatigue related soft tissue, but we'll throw him in, and if we can get 60 minutes or 70 minutes out of Gunnarsson, then great, that's a result, and the decision is justified. So there we go for another video. Thanks again for watching. Myself and Johnny will be back very soon, so please remember to subscribe if you want to see more videos from us, and if you liked it, give us a thumbs up. Speak soon. Cheers. Bye.